All right. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So today I'm here with my assistant, right, Isabella. Say hi, Isabella, to everyone. There you go. And um, and it's a pleasure, obviously, to have you all here. Today we're gonna have a lecture covering the Sermon of the Mount, and the title is going to be "Lay Up Treasures in Heaven," which is a very appropriate title, very important for us. We're just having that conversation about, doing certain things, right? Carrying the water, for example, right, to help us here. But before we start the prayer, before we start the lecture by Tiago, we're going to have, as we usually do here at TSS, a small reading and a prayer. And today, Teresa is going to help us with that. And then we're going to go straight into the lecture of today. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. We're going to be reading from the book Happy Life by Divaldo Pereira Franco by the Spirit of Joana de Angelis. Your ownership of earthly good is relative. In the transitory world you belong to now, what is yours today will have changed hands tomorrow. Use, but do not abuse, the resources that you command. Do not be a slave to what you hold for just a few moments, but thus avoiding suffering when it passes to another. The only goods of permanent value are the treasures of feeling, culture, and virtues. Store up treasure in heaven, the Gospels teach. So let us all now hear. Connect our thoughts, connect our mind, our hearts to all the good spirits around us. They are here, present, to guide and to enlighten us. In the name of God, in the name of Jesus, our Master. May the lecture of today help us to become better, help us to understand better who we are, help us in the change that we need to make. May the good spirits here enlighten and guide Tiago through this lecture. And may we be always open to this light over us, and so be it. Tiago, it's all yours.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody that is online. I'm very happy to be here today, November 10th. And, it is an honor to continue this series of lectures that are happening here, which talks a lot about the Gospels and the lessons from Jesus to all of us. We know that for those who follow the lectures here, one of the references that many of the lecturers are using is a specific book called Jesus in a Home. And what I will do, it is continuing that trend. It is to use one of the messages from this book to start a conversation about lay up treasures in heaven. Because when I was reading it, and I will share with you some of the reading of this message, it really reminded me of this passage from Jesus. So I will share with you the beginning of the reading, which is the message is called The Forgotten Gift. Everyone has focused their attention to an interesting discussion about the gifts with which heaven blesses us on earth. When Jesus commented patiently, and here it is important to remember, as Joe a couple of weeks said, this is a book of chronicles. This is a book of stories or of traditions that come from the spiritual world. Chances are Jesus taught way more than we know through the gospel. Probably his lessons go way beyond what those specific four apostles were able to give to us. And sometimes through the teachings that we have and through the messages from the spirits, we receive some, let's call, expansion of those teachings. And some of them are just like the parables that Jesus taught us through the gospel. Some of them may be oral traditions from the spiritual world that we had the opportunity to receive as well. So let's think of that as another of Jesus' parables, which is a story that has a moral significance for us and has lessons for us to learn from it. So here we have Jesus telling another story or another parable. There was once a man who have been given a gift from merit. Probably, as we said, he got his bonus hours, and then he had the chance to ask for a few things. He had the opportunity to, achieve a couple of things. And there was an angel. And the angel asked this man, well, what would you like to receive right now? And this young man thinks and says, I would like the blessing of youth. And he was granted with the blessing of youth. But at the same time that he received youth, what comes with youth sometimes is the lack of experience. It is the impulsivity. It is the lack of thinking about cause and effect. And we're going to talk more about it. Therefore, he said, I don't want this. That's not really useful. And he asked for wealth. All right? The angel granted him wealth. Again, material wealth. He was granted those riches, had great wealth for a long time, but then suddenly he started receiving a lot of anger and envy and negativity from other people. And he said, that's not what I want. And then he gives up this gift and says, now I want freedom. The angel grants freedom to the man. He has the freedom. And then suddenly he finds himself troubled by lots of temptations, because with freedom comes the opportunity to do and to be everything, good or bad. He was conflicted and he gives up freedom, but asks instead for power. And the angel, very wise, gives the man power. And what happens with power? He started gathering hatred, animosity around him with people that would rebel against his power. Okay? That's not what I want. Now I want intelligence, and so on and so forth. And for every gift that he asks, he finds himself troubled, conflicted, and understanding that somehow those gifts bring, number one, lots of troubles and perils that are attached to it. And also, he feels anguish. He feels unfulfilled. He feels the void. And then we're going to pause here because that is the first part. So let's stop when this young man asks for so many gifts. And for every gift he receives, he feels troubled about. So we bring this introduction and set the stage for that conversation, because by the moment that I was reading this passage, I immediately went to a passage in the Bible of Jesus in conversation with a young rich man. And it is interesting because when Jesus teaches us, let's try to keep in mind that Jesus is not talking to us, humans incarnated in this existence only. Jesus knows us for who we are and for who we'll become. So Jesus is talking to our souls. Jesus is speaking to our immortal spirits. That's this pair of spiritual ears that is important for us to keep open to receive those lessons and to have this dialogue with Jesus. In the story of the young rich man, it is in different places. It is in Matthew in the chapter 19. It is also in Mark in the chapter 10. And every time that we see those passages happening in different books, it is interesting because there is an emphasis there. There is something that really wants to be taught. There is something that wants some message, something that needs to be communicated to us. So let's think about it. This young rich man comes to Jesus and then asks, what can I do to achieve happiness, everlasting happiness? Jesus obviously, says, make sure that you follow all the golden rules, right? Love one another, forgive your enemies, right? Honor mother and father. And he mentions some of the commandments from the Old Testament, Don't kill, right? Don't steal. Make sure that you follow all those commandments. And then this young man says, I do all those things. I'm okay with that. I check the boxes. I don't murder. I don't commit adultery. I don't steal. I'm going good, right? Like I'm doing good. That's okay then. But if I do that, what do I lack? Again, remember the other guy that was talking to Jesus that felt that sort of anguish, that sort of void, the feeling of not necessarily being completely fulfilled? Here is this young rich man feeling that, like, I'm doing all those things, but I'm still asking for something. That is something else. What am I lacking? And if he is asking Jesus that, is because something there is missing. Well, Jesus knew this young man. And Jesus knew that he was a very wealthy young man. And he says, if you want to be perfect, go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and follow me. And that, instead of making the young man happy, that finally he had the answer that he's looking for, he becomes so anguished. And he was taken by a lot of sorrow because he had so many possessions and he could not give up from them. And we probably can deduce from that story that he didn't sell everything and he didn't follow Jesus. But like with almost everything in the gospel, it is important for us to extract the spirit from the letter. And in order to do that, we will try to break down that story and bring some of the important lessons that it gives to us, because that story represents a dialogue with many aspects of ourselves. Let's think about Jesus speaking to us. Many of the aspects of that story represent one aspect of our own selves. Okay, Tiago, beautiful. How can we do that? Thank you for asking. Let's think about a young man. Let's start with that young rich man, right? What may he represent that? And remember that we read the first message, right? That reminds us of youth. We're talking about certain level of ambition. We're talking about power. We're talking about material wealth. For some, we're also thinking about influence, social status. There are lots of things that, we aspire to achieve. But at the same time, as the message told us, if we think about certain specific qualities that we have, I would prefer to call qualities because we learn with them between 16 and 25. You don't need to go back there, okay? I don't need you to be looking back and, nostalgic about this time. But let's think about what happens with us during this age. We have all of that. We want to be young forever. We see youth forever. We are impulsive. We lack the ability, and this is scientific, we lack the ability to measure cause and effect. We think on the immediate gratification approach. It is very difficult for us until we reach a certain level of, brain maturity. It is difficult for us to make connections between cause and effect and have long-term conscious discernment thinking. That's what happens with us. Therefore, if we think about those young men or our young selves, spiritually speaking, we can extract that there is some level of spiritual immaturity. We can look at those aspects of the youth and impulsivity, lack of long-term thinking as us still spiritually immature. Because we may be older than 25 for this earth, and we may have long-term thinking, and we may measure cause and effect better than we did in our teenagers. At the same time, as immortal spirits, it is still difficult for many of us, me included, to think long-term as spirits. Thinking long-term as spirits means, what am I cultivating? What are the qualities that I am cultivating, nurturing within myself that I will be able to carry forward throughout my future existences as spirit incarnated in my future lives? That is very different from thinking of one existence. I may have long-term thinking about 5 or 10 or 15 or 30 years from now. I can be responsible saving money for my retirement. But I may still spiritually have difficulty envisioning what are the qualities that I need to nurture for my spiritual eternal life. And as always, the Spiritism will happen to help and to support us into decoding those messages and bringing a meaning for us that we can use in our lives. In the Spirit's book, in the question 261, the spirits were asked, in the trials that the spirit needs to undergo, do we need to experience every single kind of temptation or go through every single kind of trial? Do I need to receive every single of those gifts, let's say? The spirits say no. It will depend on what you do with the gifts that you receive in this existence. Many of the trials that we receive are lessons for us to practice certain qualities of the Spirit, which we call today the virtues. And if we are successful, we will continue progressing with new and more sublime lessons in our journey for spirituality. However, if we fail, we will then be exposed to other specific kinds of experience, many of them very challenging because they will touch on our imperfections. It will be a repetition of the lessons until those imperfections become non-existent for us. Therefore, are those gifts necessarily negative? No. However, do we know the importance of those gifts to us? That is the question. Why are we being given those gifts today? Therefore, if we think about what does this young man represent for us, it represents our imperfect selves, still attached to the earthly concessions, possessions, aspects of our lives today, our personality. And we are seeking for opportunities to evolve and to grow spiritually. We are our imperfect selves asking for the questions and many times don't understand the answers. When life gives us very important gifts, including those most challenging and painful and conflicting, those are lessons for us. What are we going to do with them? That's when Jesus comes and presents the challenging solution to this young man. That was his challenge. For many of us, there will be different ones that will lead us to anguish when we discover, oh, that's what I need to do. Really? That's what I need to achieve? Are those the people that I need to reconcile with? Is this the path that I need to take that I dread? But I'm being constantly giving this message. That's what we need to do with the opportunities and the challenges that we are being given. Then we have the earthly treasures, right? Then it is those possessions that this young man talks about. And it is about those gifts that the first person was asking for to the angel. Again, all of those concessions that we are given, but we are still calling them treasures. Again, it depends on what we will do with them. And depends how we give the importance to them as well. Please. Again, in the Spirit's book, the spirits are asked, why has God bestowed wealth and power to some, poverty to others? And the spirits will answer, in order to test everybody differently. Moreover, as you know, such trials are chosen by the spirits themselves, and they often fail. The most important part in this answer is such trials are chosen by the spirits themselves. One interesting thing is, today incarnated, we may not understand the reasons why we go through the challenges that we go through. But our spiritual selves, undressed from the influences of the material life, many times we will ask exactly for those trials, because as spirits we understand that those are necessary for us, for our evolution. And then we incarnate, and then the influence of the environment, the eclosion of our own true selves, our imperfections, will sometimes speak very strongly to us, and will make that path of going successfully through those challenges more difficult. Therefore, those earthly possessions are treasures because we asked for them many times, and we find them difficult. As spirits, usually we ask for the difficult tasks, and many times our mentors and guides will say, "Are you sure?" Right? Remember the angels. Is that power that you want? Is that youth? Is that freedom? Okay, it is a lesson, right? Being successful or not gives us important, lessons no matter what. And we fail many times because our spiritual selves attached to material possessions don't understand yet the consequences of our choices. And then we can even put in perspective, in the question number 815, the spirits are asking, and what about wealth? What about poverty? Some receive, more, some receive less. The spirits say that's okay because it belongs to each one of us. Isabella gave a lecture on the challenges of wealth and poverty, the riches and the poverty back then. But at the end of the day, it is about all of those are challenges to us in different period of our spiritual growth. We may receive the wealth today, we may receive the poverty in another time, and it may have nothing to do with money either, but it may have to do with intelligence, may have to do with physical abilities, it may have to do with the presence or not of people that appreciate us. It may have to do with an environment that is very conducive to many illicit activities that we are exposed to exactly to test our ability to resist to them. Each single one of us, we receive the challenge that is most important for us, for our individual process of evolution. And Allan Kardec, commenting on the question 816, then would say, wealth, power, and again, it is not only about money, it's about that power, it's about that influence, it's about that position. They are all the passions that potentially can attach us to matter and then keep us from spiritual perfection. And that is a very important message here, because our earthly treasures or our earthly concessions that we usually choose to have in order to, one, redeem ourselves from past mistakes or from the misuse in previous existences, therefore having the opportunity to reframe our relationship with those concessions. For instance, instead of accumulating it to myself, being able to share for the benefits of others. Learn how to use those concessions for their greater good and for our own spiritual advancement. Here we have not only the young man, but also those earthly possessions that all represent aspects that we need to learn about. And then we come to this journey, right? To this journey of spiritualization. Okay, you're telling me all those beautiful things. So how can then move from the spiritual youth to a more, mature spirituality? Yes, that is exactly the journey. And there are things that easily we can do. When things are easy for us in this life, means that probably we already learned them in other existences. They were probably challenging in one point, and they are not today. I always remember that. And I just give some example of self-disclosure, not because I'm good or better than anybody else, but because it is about challenges that we all go through. You know, one of the first lectures that I've learned here, that I listened here, it was from Marco, about the diseases and the illnesses of today being actually the spiritual healing because of past habits that we had. And because of that lecture, I quit smoking cigarettes. And somehow there was it hit me. And sometimes it hits people. And it's like, you know what? Chances are, if I'm not sick today, I will probably be sick in the future. And that future may be long after I move from this existence, but I will carry naturally the consequences of my habits and my actions to next existences. I will create that, what we call that kind of a relationship with the divine laws. And some of them, we try to bend them to our own benefit, but the laws bring us back to the path of spiritual evolution. And that involves sometimes taking care of ourselves. Our bodies are, as Jesus said, our temple. Essential for us to live well this existence. Am I hurting it? In a very simple way, simply hurting my own body. Let alone if I'm hurting others, let alone if I'm hurting my neighbors, let alone if I'm hurting other people, let alone if I'm creating dissent and pain and suffering. This will all, I will carry it all. So it is important for us to think about that. If we are looking at ourselves as immortal spirits, evolving constantly and being faced with the consequences of our actions constantly, if not today, tomorrow. That's what Jesus said to the young man, right? And it's important for us to understand, what does that mean through the lenses of spiritism, right? You will have treasures in heaven. That's what Jesus said. Give everything, sell everything, give to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Okay. What are those treasures? Because if I'm giving up everything else, what is then valuable that I'm keeping? What is valuable? What are those treasures then? Right? Does Jesus want us to leave everything we achieved behind only to follow him? No. Remember, let's take the spirit from the letter, right? For us to gather what Jesus is saying, treasures in heaven, we must understand what life is about. We must understand what life is for. What is that we have? Why do we have? What to do with what we are and what we have today? What are the lessons that we need to learn from this life today to continue our journey of spiritualization from here to other realms for the eternity? So when Jesus is saying you will have treasures in heaven, Jesus is speaking to the immortal spirit. What you have today will end. But there are qualities that you have that will never end. That's what Jesus is saying. It is not simply doing things for the sake of doing. What is the meaning of what I'm doing? I may be not killing anybody, but it doesn't mean that I'm treating them well. I may not be stealing from anybody, but doesn't mean that I don't have a tendency of greed and selfishness or pride or feeling superior to others. That young man already did all that was in the book. What did he mean? Why was he feeling still so empty? What was missing? Did he really cultivate treasures in heaven? Do we? That is a beautiful message in the gospel according to Spiritism from the Spirit Lacordaire. It's a long message. And he talks about the love for earthly possessions. He talks about the obstacles for our moral advancement. And one passage, one little phrase that really struck with me, that really again reminded me of that specific feeling. It was that one. It was that question. Even if your coffers are full, even if your, bucket of gold is full, even if your bucket of possession is full, is there not an emptiness in your heart? He's asking that young man, asking for the gifts. He's asking that young rich man, why are you so anguished? He's asking us, do you feel fulfilled even though you may acquire everything? But what is that is fulfilling you? What is that filling that void in you? We start our journey of spiritualizations when we come to something that the Spirit Joanna de Angelis would call a crisis of values. For us, still immortal spirits, imperfect, going through several expiations and trials and incarnations that involve lots of challenges, it is almost inevitable that we go through something that is called a crisis. When our old selves and our old habits are not enough anymore to fill the void. And we long then for the new, renewed, mature spirit in evolution that is able to make the distinction and to discern between what perishes and what I can take forever with me and really fulfill me. Giving perspective to what I have today, understanding that one day this will leave me because they don't belong to me and they never did. They belong to God. And what is mine, nothing will replace, nothing will destroy, nothing will be removed. We sense that. And in many ways, and many people, when they are wise and old, and they usually tell us, maybe I'll never feel that total fulfillment. But I will feel much better depending the path that I take. And which path is that, Chuck? Which path is that? It is beautiful what Joanna de Angelis said. And she calls that the spiritual intelligence. She actually makes a correlation between our intellectual coefficient, which is our IQ, which is then our intellectual maturity, intellectual growth, and also she will talk about the emotional coefficient, our emotional intelligence. But she says, but never forget, as immortal spirits, we can call something like the spiritual intelligence. That will be then what is going to take us away from that feeling of existential emptiness. Because it will allow us to see life, sentiments in a broader and more meaningful way. To see things in context. Which context? The context of our successive existences. Looking at incarnation from the point of view of the Spirit. Understanding the reasons why we have what we have today. And she would say this will take us to the path of self-realization. It's beautiful, it's powerful, and it's very meaningful. This is the foundation of support for any other things that we have. And when we talk about gifts, we can talk about our intelligence, we can talk about our emotions, we can talk about our physical strength. It will give meaning to all of those gifts that we receive, all of those concessions, because we will know how to use them. And we will know how to use them as tools that one day we'll give back because they're not ours. And what we will give account to, it's not how much I took care of those tools, it's how I used it, it's the product. Back to our story from the very beginning. After all the torments, all the afflictions that young man went through, asking for all those different gifts, the angel tells this person, look, you are asking for all of this and you become afflicted every single time because you forgot something. And the gift that the angel explains that has been forgotten to this man, in that story is called courage. And the courage means it will produce the enthusiasm and the good spirit in which you will carry out the work that is needed for each and every single day. Whether you have youth, whether you have wealth, whether you have power, whether you have freedom or not. Because the courage is to understand that the youth that I have today will be taken away from me. And the power that I have today will go away in some point. And the freedom that I have can be taken from me at any time. But that courage, that enthusiasm, that ability to understand the meaning of all that I have and all that I am, that will not be taken from me. In that story, this is called courage. And that story, after Jesus tells that little parable, that little story, he would come back and say, youth is beautiful, wealth is pleasing, yes, freedom is admirable. Remember, he's not criticizing any of it. Power is brilliant. Intelligence is respectable. And a blissful marriage, which also the young man asked for, until the day that God took his wife away from him. But if people do not have courage with which to deal with the good and the bad things in human life in order to learn how to stay in the pathway towards God, the temporary gifts of the transitory experience are of little use. There are qualities that we possess that are still in what I call a latent state. We have those heavenly treasures planted in our spirits. They are there, ready to be developed, to be practiced, to be mastered, and to be perfected. Allan Kardec will tell us that there are the virtues. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, in the chapter 15, he would say the two virtues that can be summed up, like can sum up every single other spiritual quality that we have. And he points out to two. One is called charity, and one is called humility or humbleness. And the charity represents our attitude towards others. Forgiveness, the patience, the tolerance, the respect. The humbleness, it is the attitude with ourselves, understanding who we are, no more, no less, but especially not more. Charity and humility. And they are the antidote against all the earthly treasures that become chains to our evolution. Because with charity and with humbleness, we are able to understand the meaning of all that we have today and put a good use. Because we will have that understanding that if I'm not doing something good to others or to myself, those tools are useless and they will take me nowhere and they will delay my path of spiritualization for as long as I overly attach to them. Let's remember that passage, lay up treasures in heaven. It is part of the most powerful code of conduct that we could have ever learned. That is right there in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus sits and directly addresses all of us, represented in that moment by that community that was eager for lessons and was suffering and was having that. Imagine how many people sitting down. Those were on the thousands sitting down around Jesus and probably having that same feeling and trying to find something that really would fulfill them spiritually. And Jesus very clearly tells us, be charitable, forgive your enemies, be humble, don't let your left hand see what right hand does, be pure in heart, because the pure of heart will see God. Gentleness and mercy. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the merciful, because they will obtain mercy. Love one another. Love God as you love yourself. Love each other like I have loved you. All of that in different times Jesus told us. Forgive the offenses. Pray for those who persecute you. Have the courage and have the perseverance. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, because it will be achieved. Those are all the heavenly treasures that we are reminded about. And those are seeds that were planted in us that finally will grow to complete us in that place that if today is void will become this garden where all those qualities will be nurtured, cultivated, and grow and develop and become our new selves. And Jesus says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break and steal. But lay up treasures for yourselves in heaven, where neither moth or rust destroys, and where their thieves do not break and steal. And hopefully this message continues echoing inside us and help us to understand that between earth and heaven, we have a journey, and that journey can be really fulfilling to all of us. Thank you. Oh yes, any questions? I need to get used to it. Any questions from anybody? Any comments? I usually say, if you don't have any questions, when I'm facilitating my groups that in my work, or you understood everything, or you understood nothing, either way, I hope that it was of help. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck, for the lecture. And, all right. So after we learned so much about the heavenly treasures, we're going to continue with. Oh, my assistant's here. Okay. Hello. You can stay right there. Yeah. We're going to continue with our activities today, which we're going to go through the passes. And for those of you who may not know, the passes are just a transmission of energy, right? Yeah, I'm gonna say hi to them. Yeah, 1 second. Yeah, and it's a transfusion of good energies, basically, right, between all of us. And before we do that, I would like to thank all the our friends that followed up with us over the internet. Thank you very much, and I hope we see you again over the internet next times. For the passes now, we're going to dim the lights a little bit.